Welcome to another episode of Travels with Charlie, Vermont Politics in Real Life. Today we're going to be discussing freedom of speech and censorship in the media. My guest today, former Governor Jim Douglas and Rob Roper, president of the Ethan Allen Institute. Thank you both for being with me today. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on right now throughout the country, and a lot of people feel that our First Amendment rights are under attack. We've seen recently a principal of a school in Windsor, Vermont. She was fired for posting her thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement. Even in our recent presidential campaign, we've seen that the media's refusal to cover the allegations against Joe Biden's son. So there's a lot to digest there. We'll let you bite whatever you'd like first, Governor, and I'll let you go first. Thank you for being with us again.
Well, I've lived some of this, Charlie. I teach political science at Middlebury College, my alma mater, and we've had a few brushes with the First Amendment over the last couple of years. It was in the spring of 2017 that Charles Murray, a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, came to speak about his latest book, and he was shouted down literally by a mob of students and faculty and others in a hall on campus. After his attempt at a speech, as he was leaving campus, there was a fracas, and a colleague in our political science department, a professor, was injured. I don't understand what's so difficult. In fact, even Bernie Sanders, our junior senator, was asked about the Murray appearance, and Bernie said, "Let him speak. What are we afraid of?" And I guess that's my question. What are we afraid of? We don't have to agree with someone who comes to campus or to any other public forum. We can choose not to come. We can have a competing alternative event, or we can come and engage him. And I think the last is really preferable.
Rob, it seems like there's such a resistance if it's a voice that we don't agree with or someone doesn't agree with, that we shut them down. We don't want to hear them. And it's not just on college campuses, university campuses. It's also, we see it in the media. We see it in social media specifically with Twitter and Facebook shutting down accounts because they post something that, well, truthfully, it's a political belief that they don't agree with.
Yeah, and I think it's a problem. In fact, we did a radio show about this today with my partner, Bill Sayre. And we had a caller come in and say, hey, you know, Facebook and Twitter, these are corporations. And the First Amendment really only applies to the federal government and then the state governments as well. And the caller had a point. But if we really want to live in a country that respects the First Amendment, it's incumbent upon all of us to live these principles in our own lives. I think it was Voltaire who said that, you know, I don't agree with what you say, but I will defend with my life your right to say it. That sentiment is gone, you know, on college campuses, on Twitter. It's easy for me to say, I don't like your opinion, you should be banned. But what about when it's my turn, right, to be on the receiving end of that ban?
Well, what about, and let's use as an example, the principal, Windsor School, that was fired for posting on her private Facebook page some comments about Black Lives Matter. And I don't have them in front of me, but she was fired. That's another area that's of great concern.
Well, it is. I mean, especially when you consider she didn't say, I'm opposed to Black Lives Matter. She said, I'm in favor of the spirit behind Black Lives Matter. I would like to get behind Black Lives Matter, but I don't like the coercive nature that some of the efforts to get people behind it are taking. And I don't think that if you don't want to be overtly in favor of it, that it means you're a racist. The social media machine got to work on her, and she lost her job.
And what does that do to someone that's thinking, perhaps, Governor, and I know you're not thinking of running for any other office.
No, I'm not, dear.
Let's make it clear. But someone that's considering a run in politics, I would think that they must do a lot of, well, you know what? I don't really need to put myself in front of all of that and be barraged. I just don't need to do that.
I think that's right. The 45th president is an exception, but most people would say, I don't want my online life to be scrutinized. I don't want every comment I've made to be a matter of intense scrutiny during a political campaign. So I think it is going to limit the number of very qualified people who get involved in politics these days.
So very appropriate. Here we are at the Vermont Historical Society with, looks like a pretty old printing press in back of me as we continue our discussion on freedom of the press. As we were just talking about what's happening with, the cultural changes with these kids today. But a serious question, if this is where we are today, where we've created safe spaces and all these, we now have bulldozer parents, kind of look forward. Where do you think these kids, when they're parents, will they reverse? Will it be different? Or will it be even more? This is what's accepted, and maybe at that point, freedom of the press, God forbid, doesn't exist.
Maybe I'm naive, but at some point, after they graduate from college, kids are going to be in the real world. And I'm concerned about that transition, because college, it seems to me, is the time of someone's life and a place in these young people's lives where we should be preparing them for the future. But if there's too much coddling, if there's too much safety in terms of the space on a campus, then I think that transition is going to be very difficult. When they get to the real world, perhaps I'm naive, but I think maybe they'll understand the reality of life, the bigger picture, and behave a little bit differently. I read recently that there's some interest, although not a whole lot yet, in revisiting the lowering of the voting age, bringing it back to 21, because if these kids are so sensitive and need to be shielded from all kinds of ideas, well, good question as to whether they should be choosing our leaders.
Let's talk about the media, and I'd love to hear your perception, Governor, if you see that the media has changed much since you've left office. It seems that, again, at this point, I don't think I've ever seen, there's always been bias in the media, but I don't think I've ever seen as much bias as I see right now. And some of that, again, that plays into the issue of censorship. When there's a story out there that most of the mainstream media refuses to cover. Case in point, Joe Biden's son. Now these are allegations, and supposedly there's some proof there, but most of the mainstream media decided, well, we're not going to cover that. Of course, when they had some allegations against Donald Trump, it was like, well, that's news, and they'd devote 15 or 20 minutes to a 30-minute newscast on it, and most news networks didn't even devote a minute of time in their newscasts. So is there that much of a change in the media's bias today, Gov?
I think there is a change. What really annoys me is to see headlines that say President Trump made false accusations about an election result. Well, they may ultimately be unsubstantiated, but it's not the reporter's job to make that judgment when writing a news story. A reporter should report the president's comments and then report somebody else's so that there are different points of view reflected, but not make a conclusion in writing a story. And that's certainly different from the olden days. Secondly, I remember when I was growing up, and even a little later, watching Uncle Walter on the CBS Evening News deliver the day's events. Walter Cronkite, Huntley and Brinkley, and Peter Jennings, and folks of that era told it like it was. They gave it to us.
So those that are in their 20s watching this today, we may have to
well, okay.
put some subtitles or some pictures of them.
Well, maybe you should. But the point is, news anchors were deemed reliable and balanced. We learned later that Walter Cronkite...
It didn't seem that they had a bias.
No, Walter Cronkite was quite liberal. We learned later on, but not while he was delivering the news. And I think that's the point I'm fumbling toward.
If mainstream media refuses to cover a story, is that a type of censorship as well?
It is. They can. It's, I guess, the Zen approach to looking at the media. It's not only what you report; it's what you choose not to report. And from my perspective as president of Ethan Allen Institute, my partner and I, John McClowery, have this complaint all the time, particularly on issues like the Global Warming Solutions Act, the Transportation Climate Initiative, that we're covering very closely. And not to brag, but we're pretty knowledgeable about these issues. We just happen to be in opposition to what the I guess, the dominant political class would want. But you see, we've never once been called to comment on a story regarding either one of those issues.
Some of the cultural influences that are happening today, and it seems like they're getting even more and more, progressing even more that way. But it seems that it's and you even mentioned it earlier, Governor, the coddling of our youth, the way that we handle them, the way that we treat them. I'm sure you even see it in the way that you grade students today. It's like, well, we don't give D's or F's. You either pass or fail, right?
That's exactly right. I went to my new faculty briefing a decade ago. There were maybe 50 people there, and I felt like the dean who was conducting the briefing was speaking directly to me when he said, "For those of you who haven't been around the academy in a while, you should know that grades are a little higher than they used to be." Okay, I play along. I'm not going to be a jerk.
Don't you think people should be rewarded for doing a good job, Rob?
Oh, I absolutely think people should be rewarded for doing a good job, but I take it in a slightly different tangent on the coddling of the mind, this whole triggering thing that we see now, where students can't be exposed to something that might be, in quotes, triggering to them. And you see books like Huckleberry Finn and being eradicated because of certain language in the book. But it takes away the ability of the student to see context. I mean, historical context, literary context. I mean, Huckleberry Finn was a remarkable book in that it was the first piece of mainstream fiction by a great American author, Mark Twain, to make an African American character a central human character in a book. So if you're trying to talk about great moments in African American history, that book should be on the list. But instead, because it uses some language that was more mainstream in 1880 or when Twain wrote it, all of a sudden it's triggering, and it's this horrible thing.
A few years ago at the beginning of a course, I said to my class, "I have to give you a trigger warning before we begin. We might be discussing Republicans in this course."
How much of the class stayed?
They stuck it out.
So this is the part of the show that I really enjoy, and then that's taking the wand out. Now, the last time we did a show together with you, Rob, we didn't have a wand. We had a virtual wand, but the budget's gotten much bigger, so we have an actual wand now. I'm going to give it to you, and you can each make a wish today.
All right, so I've got my magic wand, and my one wish is that we can come together as a country and respect the First Amendment and its spirit in our hearts, not look at it as a law that needs to be enforced with government force, but as something that we truly believe, and that we take that Voltaire quote to heart, that even if I disagree with what you say, I will defend with my life your right to say it.
Well, I hope that in the not too distant future we can respect one another, respect our differences, understand that we're a very diverse country, different experiences, different backgrounds, different ideas, but just because someone has a different thought, it doesn't mean that it's wrong or illegitimate. It's just different. And we have to listen to one another. Perhaps we might learn something from hearing a different point of view and find a way to reconcile differences and work together for the best interests of this country, this state, and our own communities.
Thank you both for being with me today. Once again, I want to thank former Governor Jim Douglas and Rob Roper from the Ethan Allen Institute for being my guest on Travels with Charlie. And I want to remind you that you can see more episodes of Travels with Charlie, Vermont Politics in Real Life, on YouTube, on Facebook, and I'll see you in my travels.
I'll see you in my travels, and I'll be hanging round, covering lots of ground. Give me some time to share what's on your mind. It's time well spent